5,000 men, one stick. Not a weapon, not a tool for building walls or digging trenches. Something far more intimate than that. Every single morning, every single soldier. The same object. Used, rinsed, passed on, used again. And the most shocking part, this was not a punishment. This was not poverty. This was not desperation. This was policy. In the most advanced military machine the ancient world had ever produced. An army that conquered everything from the Scottish Highlands to the Saharan desert. This was considered completely normal. How? Close your eyes for a second and picture a Roman soldier. You probably see the same image everyone sees. Gleaming armor, a red-plumed helmet, a shield with the Eagle of Rome painted across it, standing on a hilltop somewhere in the Mediterranean sun, looking absolutely unstoppable. That image is not wrong. Roman soldiers were unstoppable. For nearly 1,000 years, the Roman military dominated the known world. They didn't just win battles. They engineered victory. They built systems so precise, so ruthlessly efficient, that historians are still studying them today. Rome had aqueducts moving millions of gallons of water across mountain ranges. They had roads so perfectly engineered that cars drive on the foundations of some of them right now. They had a legal system complex enough that modern lawyers still quote it. These were not primitive people guessing their way through history. And yet, every morning in every Roman military camp, in Germany, in Britain, in North Africa, in Mesopotamia, tens of thousands of soldiers woke up, walked to the same building, sat down side by side with no walls between them, and reached for a stick. A single stick, shared by everyone, tipped with a sea sponge, soaked in vinegar. This was how the greatest army on earth started every single day. And here is what nobody talks about. What textbooks skip past in 2 sentences because it feels too strange, too uncomfortable to explain properly. This was not an accident of history. This was not what happened when civilization broke down. This was what happened when civilization worked. There is a system here. A cold, calculated, brilliant system. And once you see it fully, once you understand every layer of what Rome built and why, you will never look at the ancient world the same way again. Let's go all the way back to the beginning. To understand the stick, you first need to understand the camp, because most people picture Roman soldiers fighting. What they don't picture is what Roman soldiers did for the other 22 hours of the day. They marched, they built, they maintained. A Roman legion on the move followed a schedule of almost inhuman discipline. They rose before dawn, they ate, they packed, they formed up, and then they marched. Sometimes 15 miles, sometimes 20, sometimes more, in full equipment. A helmet, armor, shield, 2 javelins, a short sword, a dagger, and a personal pack carrying rations, tools, and camping equipment. The total weight, somewhere between 40 and 60 pounds, every single day. By late afternoon, exhausted, feet bleeding, muscles burning, they stopped, and instead of sleeping, they picked up shovels. Every Roman marching camp, called a castra, was built from scratch each night using a layout so standardized, so precisely repeated, that a soldier transferred from a unit in Spain could arrive at a camp in Syria and immediately know where everything was, the same streets every time, the same gate positions every time, the same placement for the commander's quarters, the storage, the stables, the kitchens. And in every single camp, without exception, without compromise, the same placement for one specific structure. The latrine. The Roman military latrine was not a hole in the ground. It was not a ditch behind a bush. It was a building, a dedicated, purpose-built, engineered structure placed at a deliberate distance from the kitchen and the water supply. Because even without understanding germ theory, Roman engineers had observed the connection between waste, water, and mass illness. The design was consistent. A long trench, sometimes lined with stone, sometimes with timber. Above it, a wooden or stone bench running the full length, with cut openings, evenly spaced every 2 feet or so, 30 holes, sometimes more, no walls between them, and underneath, not stagnant waste. Moving water. A channel connected directly to the camp's water system. Fed from a nearby river, a constructed aqueduct, or a drainage system engineered specifically for this purpose. The water moved constantly, flushing waste away from the camp through a drainage outlet positioned, always, downhill from the living areas. Running alongside the front of the bench, at knee level, there was a second channel, smaller, also carrying fresh water, or water treated with salt or vinegar. This is where the stick lived, the xylospongium. The word sounds almost elegant in Latin. It breaks down simply. Xylo meaning wood, spongium meaning sponge. A wooden handle, roughly the length of a forearm, with a natural sea sponge fixed firmly to one end. You used it. You dipped it in the front channel. You rinsed it. You placed it back, for whoever came next. Now here is where most people stop and make the same mistake. They apply a modern lens to an ancient reality. They imagine picking up that sponge and they feel disgust. And by modern standards, by the standards of a world that has antibiotics, germ theory, indoor plumbing, and individual everything, that reaction makes complete sense. But step out of that lens for a moment. Step into Rome. Salt water is not random. Salt water has genuine antimicrobial properties. It disrupts bacterial cell membranes, draws fluid out of microorganisms, makes survival significantly harder for a wide range of pathogens. Ancient people discovered this through observation long before anyone could explain why it worked. Vinegar, diluted acetic acid, goes further. It is actively hostile to bacteria, fungi, and many parasites. Roman soldiers and civilians used it constantly. They mixed it with water to drink. They used it to preserve food. They used it to clean wounds. Its presence in that front channel was not decoration. It was the closest thing the ancient world had to disinfectant. Did it eliminate all risk? Absolutely not. By modern microbiological standards, a shared sponge is still a contamination risk, regardless of what you rinse it in. But this is not a comparison to 2024. This is a comparison to 100 AD. And in 100 AD, what Rome built in that latrine building was extraordinary. Let's talk about what this actually felt like. Because the numbers and the engineering are one thing. The lived experience is something else entirely. You were 22 years old. You grew up in a small farming village in what is now northern Italy. Your father was a farmer. His father was a farmer. You signed a military contract at 18. 25 years of service in exchange for a salary, equipment, and a land grant when you finished. 7 years in, you were stationed in what is now Romania. It is January. You wake up inside a leather tent shared with 7 other men. The tent is maybe 4 meters wide and 3 meters deep. 8 bodies in that space. The condensation from your breathing has made the inside of the tent damp. The man to your left snores. The man to your right hasn't washed his feet in longer than you want to think about. You need to use the latrine. You get up. You put on your sandals. You walk across the frozen dirt of the camp street in the dark, a torch somewhere ahead of you showing the way. The latrine building is never far. It is always in the same place. You walk in. The smell is exactly what you expect. There is no pleasant way to describe it. Even with the flowing water channel underneath, even with the ventilation built into the structure, this is a room used by hundreds of men every day. You sit down. The stone is shockingly, brutally cold. The man to your left is someone you've known for 4 years. You have fought beside him. You have carried him when he was wounded. You have shared food with him on March days when the supply cart was late and both of you were running on empty. You do not think it is strange to sit beside him here. This is just life. You finish. You reach for the xylospongium, you dip it, you use it, you rinse it in the front channel, the vinegar water cold on your fingers. You place it back. You stand up, adjust your tunic, and walk back toward the tent. Breakfast. Hard biscuits, a piece of cured meat, watered down wine mixed with vinegar, maybe some olive oil if the supply train arrived recently, will be in 20 minutes. And then another day begins. This was not an occasional experience. This was not something soldiers endured on bad campaigns. This was every morning. For 25 years, Now let's talk about what happened when the system failed, because Rome built these systems for a reason, and that reason was carved into history in the bloodiest possible way, over and over again. Disease was the invisible enemy that no Roman general could see coming, and no Roman soldier could fight back against with a sword. In the camps where sanitation broke down, where latrines were poorly maintained, where waste contaminated water supplies, where soldiers relieved themselves wherever was convenient rather than where it was safe, the results were devastating. Dysentery moved through a military camp the way fire moved through dry wood. You would have a functioning unit of 500 men on a Monday. By the following weekend, 200 of them could be incapacitated, vomiting, severely dehydrated, unable to stand, let alone fight. Typhoid was slower but deadlier. It incubated quietly for 1 to 3 weeks before symptoms appeared. Meaning by the time soldiers were falling ill, contamination had already spread through the entire water system. Intestinal parasites were so common in the ancient world that archaeologists find them in latrine sediment samples from virtually every excavation of Roman era sites. Whipworm, roundworm, tapeworm. Living inside soldiers' digestive systems, draining nutrition, causing chronic pain and weakness that accumulated over months and years of campaigning. The Romans could not eliminate all of this. No ancient civilization could. But they could manage it. They could slow it. They could build systems that kept their army functional where other armies collapsed into sick, disorganized masses of suffering men. And they enforced those systems' same iron discipline they applied to everything else. Because Roman military discipline was not a suggestion. It was not a cultural norm that soldiers were expected to follow voluntarily. It was law, backed by consequences so severe that most soldiers never needed to be told twice. Relieving yourself outside the designated latrine in a Roman camp was a punishable offense, not a minor one. Flogging was on the table for violations that endangered camp hygiene. This was not cruelty for its own sake. This was a commander understanding that one soldier's bad decision could start a disease chain that killed 100 men. Roman officers understood something fundamental about military medicine that most of the ancient world never grasped. The enemy outside the walls was dangerous. The enemy inside the camp's water supply was lethal. And if you want to understand just how seriously Rome took discipline, not just hygiene discipline, but all of it, consider this. If a Roman unit showed cowardice in battle, if they broke formation, if they ran when they should have held, the punishment was decimation. Every 10th man in the unit was selected by lottery, and then beaten to death. By his own comrades, men he had eaten with, slept with, fought alongside. Not by the enemy, by his brothers. This is the world in which the Xylus Bongium existed. A world where the rules were not flexible, where the system was not optional, where the engineers and commanders who built these protocols understood that discipline was the difference between an empire and a footnote. Now let's pull the camera back even further, because the most powerful way to understand what Rome built is to compare it to everything that came after it. The Germanic tribes that Rome fought along the Rhine and Danube frontiers, fierce, formidable warriors with genuine battlefield courage, had no centralized sanitation system in their settlements. Human waste contaminated water sources. Disease rates were higher. Life expectancy was shorter. When Rome eventually contracted and fell, the knowledge of how to build these systems, the aqueducts, the drainage networks, the engineered latrines, largely disappeared from Europe. Not immediately, not completely. But gradually, as centralized Roman infrastructure deteriorated, sanitation deteriorated with it. Fast forward to the Crusades. 12 centuries after Rome's peak, European armies in the Middle East were dying from disease at catastrophic rates, partially from the unfamiliar climate, partially from pathogens to which they had no immunity, but significantly from the same problem Rome had solved: waste management in military camps. Fast forward again. The 30 Years' War in the 17th century. Disease killed more soldiers than combat in almost every major campaign. Armies would march into a region, establish camps, and begin dying from the inside out. Even in the American Civil War, just 160 years ago, Roughly 2 soldiers died from disease for every one killed in battle. The primary killers were dysentery, typhoid, and pneumonia, all heavily linked to poor sanitation, poor water management, the absence of the kind of systematic camp hygiene that Rome had enforced 2,000 years earlier. Read that again. 2,000 years later. The same problem, killing the same way. Rome had not solved it perfectly, but Rome had understood it in a way that most of the world forgot for nearly 2 millennia. So let's bring it all the way home. Let's actually answer the question. Why did Roman soldiers wipe with a shared stick? The easy answer is because that's what they had. But that answer misses everything important. The real answer is this: because Rome looked at the daily reality of tens of thousands of men living in extreme proximity, eating together, sleeping together, bleeding together. And instead of accepting the chaos and disease that destroyed every other ancient army, they engineered a solution. The Xylospongium was not born from poverty. It was born from observation. From someone, somewhere in the long history of the Roman military, noticing that armies which managed waste systematically survived longer, stayed healthier, and won more often than armies that didn't. Salt, water, and vinegar were not random choices. They were the best available antiseptic technology of the ancient world, applied deliberately. The flowing water channel underneath the seats was not convenient placement. It was Roman hydraulic engineering applied to the most unglamorous problem imaginable. The standardized camp layout. The latrine always in the same place, always the same distance from the kitchen and the water supply, was not habit. It was protocol, written down, trained into every soldier, enforced by every commander. This was a system. A cold, clear, functional system designed to keep human bodies operational under conditions that would otherwise break them apart. Rome did not build an empire despite the boring details. Rome built an empire because of them. There is something genuinely unsettling about that realization if you sit with it long enough. We live in a world that celebrates the dramatic moments, the battles, the speeches, the great men standing on the steps of great buildings making great decisions, and Rome had all of that. Rome had Caesar crossing the Rubicon. Rome had Scipio destroying Carthage. Rome had Augustus remaking the entire Western world. But before any of that happened, before any general could give any speech, before any legion could march to any victory, thousands of ordinary men woke up in the cold dark of early morning. They walked to a stone building. They sat down next to each other. They took care of the most basic, most human, most unglamorous need a body has. And then they went back to work.